Hi, I'm Miranda. I am one of this week's discussion leaders. My partner is Jesse, who will be taking the second half of the outline. This week we read Virginia Eubank's Automating Inequality. And if you read, you know that there's kind of a narrative storyline from the author's perspective. We're kind of going to ignore that just because it muddles up the straight facts. So I'm just going to start talking about Child and Youth Services of Allegheny County. It's a department of government in Pennsylvania, Allegheny County. It provides public services and assistance to families and children in need, and it also includes an abuse and neglect hotline. So basically like a child welfare department. And then that was later turned into the Department of Human Services of Allegheny County from a commission called Compact 21 that aimed to shrink the government a little bit. So Child and Youth Services was combined with 4 other departments to form the Department of Human Services, and that was led by Mark Cherna. Mark Cherna arrived to Allegheny Child and Youth Services in 1996, and right away he noticed there was some problematic patterns and themes within the department. So he noticed that there were more adoption cases coming in than were being managed annually, so there was a constant and perpetually growing surplus of children in the system that they couldn't take care of, and there was no way that they were going to catch up. And the number of black children with child maltreatment cases was disproportionate to the number of black children in the community. So there was a racial disparity with child maltreatment cases, and there was also racial disparity in people of color as foster families, caseworkers, and administrators. They were having trouble retaining people in those positions, people of color. So that was another racial disparity that Mark Cherna noticed when he arrived. And so then when the Child and Youth Services was then converted to the Department of Human Services, Mark Cherna led that and did what he could to, in his eyes, improve the problems he saw, which we'll talk about later because that's what this chapter is all about. So Allegheny Department of Human Services today employs 940 county workers, manages 417 contracting agencies, and has an annual budget of $867 million. Mark Cherna was quoted saying, "The goal is for Child Welfare Agency to be viewed in the community as a friend, not a foe." So what he's saying there is that call screeners use a history from a data warehouse, which we'll talk about later, and it basically measures different factors that could be seen as a risk to a child or something that puts a child at greater risk for maltreatment in their home. And a lot of those variables are directly correlated with poverty, and Mark Cherna is basically saying he doesn't want to punish poverty for the sake of punishing poverty. He wants to basically allocate resources where they're needed. So if there's no active physical or sexual harm happening in the household, he doesn't want to punish parents just for being poor. So the data warehouse for Allegheny Department of Human Services, built by Mark Cherna in 1999, and it holds an average of about 800 electronic records for every person in Allegheny County. And those electronic records are obtained from public services and benefits provided by the government. So people who reach out for food stamps or public access to mental health services, childcare services, anytime a parent reaches out to a government benefit or a government service in Allegheny County, that is recorded and put on file in Child Youth Services / Department of Human Services, and that is used to build a history for cases that are then later investigated based on calls made. Sorry for the change of scenery. I was editing this video and realized I somehow lost half of it, so I'm just going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about the data warehouse for Allegheny Department of Human Services. We talked about how they obtain electronic records from public services and benefits. The DHS data warehouse uses approximately 2% of ADH's annual budget, and in 2012, Allegheny Department of Human Services experienced a $12 million budget cut and then needed to reevaluate how they were allocating resources, especially after Mark Cherna had already pointed out flaws and issues that he saw. So he took this as an opportunity to propose an algorithm that assists in decision making for call screeners on the child abuse and neglect hotline. That led to the development and designing of AFST, which is Allegheny Family Screening Tool. The Allegheny Family Screening Tool was developed and designed by Rima Vaithianathan and Emily Putnam-Hornstein in New Zealand. The AFST is a predictive model that uses 132 variables from the data warehouse in Allegheny County. It uses those 132 variables to basically score or risk rate children for risk of maltreatment. So it's a 1 to 20 point scale, and 20 is a high score, which means a child is at high risk, and a 1 is a low score, which means a child is at a low risk. So anywhere in between those points is a spectrum of risk. Things that influence or increase a risk rating are multiple reports on a child in 2 years. So if the Child Youth Services gets more than one call in a matter of a year or two, it will increase the child's risk rating for abuse in the home. Long periods on public benefits, so those public health services, food stamps, things that are put in the warehouse, the data warehouse. The longer parents and families spend on those benefits will increase a risk rating through the family screening tool. Being born to a single parent will also increase that score. There are more examples, but I figured 3 was enough. The family screening tool is meant to assist screeners for the child abuse and neglect line and not replace them. It's supposed to be a supplemental tool for decision making. There were concerns from the public about the family screening tool because it wasn't as accurate as it had been meant to be. So 70% of the children identified as high risk were actually incorrectly or falsely rated so. It also seemed like a guise to survey the poor and invade their privacy, and poor people were experiencing higher rates of child removal and loss of custody. So the counteracting plan for this was to have an observational study on 60,000 newborn babies and to risk rate them at birth and then follow them to see if the risk rating was accurate through the screening tool. It was halted by Anne Tolley in 2015, who was the social development minister at the time in New Zealand. She was quoted saying, "These children are not lab rats." And despite the fact that the experiment was halted or denied, the predictive model was still contracted anyway and is now used in Allegheny County. Jesse will be doing the rest of the outline and asking his 2 questions, but my 2 questions were, do you think that the observational experiment or the observational study of the 60,000 newborns should have been halted? If the experiment had gone ahead as it was meant to, how do you think it would have changed the way the screening tool is used today? Do you think it would still be used, or do you think it would have been improved? What's your opinion on that? My second question is, do you think that the database warehouse for the Allegheny Family Screening Tool should also use records from private institutions and not just public institutions? So right now it uses public records of families who access public health services and food stamps and things like that. Do you think those records should also be taken from private institutions to get a more even balance of affluent and people experiencing poverty? Or do you think that it's fine the way it is now? So that's the first part of the outline, and Jesse will take the second half, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.